really don't have that many more questions for you, Dr. Reid. One question I did want to ask you about, though, was some decision-making on the 11th of November at a meeting that you had with elders in Yundamur at about 1:30 p.m. that day. At around about 8:30 on the 11th, you had some meetings in Alice Springs, is that right?
Yes.
And who were they with?
So I think the very first meeting, and this is very a very vague memory, was with my senior staff, very first thing in the morning, 8 o'clock. And that would have been with my director of nursing, my director of AHPs, my deputy general manager, and possibly the director of medical services, just to talk about what had gone on in that weekend. I then had a meeting with the Yundamur staff. They came in, and to see if staff were willing to go back, as we wanted to resume services. And then there was another meeting with a regional co-ord meeting, which I attended with Sue Corner, and that was with police and other directors of the various departments.
During the second meeting, was there any discussion about staff members who weren't to return to the community?
No.
Okay. Was there any discussion with Cassandra Holland about whether or not she would return to the community?
On that Monday morning? No.
Certainly that's something that was discussed with the elders in Yundamur at around about 1:30 p.m. that day.
Yes.
And they conveyed that they didn't want Ms Holland to return. What did you understand the reason to be?
So I understood the reason had something to do maybe with the funeral, about some arrangements and the way that she'd been speaking about it or to them. So that was raised as kind of an issue. I didn't really get exactly what was said or how it was said, other than that it wasn't good. And certainly everybody, all the elders in that room, didn't want her to come back. So even though I didn't think the conversations had with everybody in the room, they were all on the same page that they didn't want her back, and nobody could come back if she came back.
Okay. Did you have any discussions with, perhaps before I move on from that, some views were also expressed about Luana coming back.
Yes.
Now, you in fact explained that the concern wasn't it, that Luana had made the decision
Yes.
for health staff to leave?
Yes.
And the community were very upset about that decision.
Yes.
What did you say or explain to the community?
I explained Luana wasn't in community at the time, that she'd been in Alice Springs. At that time, I didn't know that Luana had been in discussions. I don't believe I knew Luana had been in discussions over that weekend with staff, and so had been talking with staff. So to my knowledge then, she hadn't been any part of any discussions. And I said that I'd made the decision based on what had been going on for staff, so it had nothing to do with Luana. I said Luana as the clinic manager, I didn't believe any staff would come back if Luana didn't come back, so they accepted that. Yeah.
Was there an attempt to work through the ill feelings between the elders and Cassandra Holland in the same way that you worked those feelings through with Luana Simmons?
No. My primary concern was to try and get the clinic back open as soon as possible, and they were very strong in their view that they didn't want her back, and I didn't feel that as trying to get that clinic open as soon as possible that it was worth pursuing.
Now, I gather you've some awareness of Ms Holland's evidence from yesterday.
Yes.
You're aware that decision-making has made her feel scapegoated.
Yes, I'm sorry that she feels that way because there's nothing to do with blaming her for any of the situation or anything at all. So it was purely around that issue that she never went back.
Were there discussions with Ms Holland about the decision not to return her to Yundanu?
Yes, so must have been Tuesday morning. I told her what had happened, that I couldn't tell her exactly, but that they didn't want her back because of the way she had spoken. Yeah.
Also on the Tuesday, so this is the 12th, you attended a meeting in Yundanu at the basketball court.
Yes.
That was, I think, for everyone concerned, a very emotional meeting.
Yes.
The community was understandably incredibly upset and was looking to, and were looking to stakeholders like the police and health for answers.
Yes.
Now, you addressed the basketball court meeting.
Yes.
And you've in fact been able to identify some footage of you talking
Yes.
to the community. But I propose to play it now, given it hasn't been served yet. I received it a short time ago. One of the nurses who was present at the meeting, Matilda Starbuck, has given evidence in her statutory declaration and then also gave evidence yesterday. She feels like, as you spoke to the community, there was a lack of transparency about who made the decision, whether it was the clinic staff who decided to leave or whether it was management who gave a direction that they were to leave. Do you appreciate why she might feel like that, having watched that footage again today?
I watched that footage and thought that was not what I said when I watched that footage.
Do you appreciate that when decisions of this kind are made about the provision of healthcare in a community, it's important that there be transparency about who made the decision?
Yes.
And can you appreciate that if the community thought that it was the clinic staff themselves who made the call, that might be very damaging to the relationship between the clinic and the community?
Correct, yes.
The final questions I wanted to ask you, I've focused very much on you and your decision making, but I want to acknowledge that the Department of Health and you found yourself in a very difficult position where you were responding to a problem that really requires, you tell me if I'm wrong, a whole of government approach.
Yes.
That problem is safety of all service providers in remote communities.
Yes.
And the safety of local Indigenous residents as well.
Yes.
Do you have any insights to offer as the General Manager of the Southern Regions for what the Department of Health or these remote communities need to address problems like property offending?
Yes, I guess especially this year, things seem to be around children and property offending seems to have increased in a number of communities, especially this year. We've responded by that by putting security guards, which is obviously not addressing the issue. There have been multiple meetings between stakeholders and community leaders within these communities to try and address, but to date, I'm not aware of any actual solutions that have been come up with to stop what's happening. When I've been talking with the police, some of the issue is that caregivers leave children behind in the community, and so there is no one directly responsible for children, and they are left alone to do to their own devices, and that includes with food and that kind of thing. So, to me, it's around what resources or what assistance, especially can be given to families and with children. So it's around that. Addressing that issue is my mind, but to date I haven't really heard of any solutions to that, but that's where I think it should be targeted.
So this issue that is really acutely affecting health really requires input from Department of Housing.
Yes.
Not just to ensure that your staff are housed adequately, but to ensure that kids aren't living in overcrowded homes.
Yes.
And that they're well fed.
Yes.
It needs input from territory families.
Yes.
Corrections.
I guess in community, I'm not quite sure what corrections role has out there, but I guess, I'm not quite entirely sure how corrections, what they do out in community, but
Police?
police, yes.
What about Department of Education?
Department of Education, yes.
Is there anyone else that you think needs to be involved in?
Well, certainly the community themselves need to be involved with the regional councils. They provide lots of programs as well for youth, so the regional councils. And then there's obviously non-government organisations that work in communities that provide multiple services that need to be included.
Thank you, Your Honour. Dr. Reid, my name is Mullins. I appear on behalf of the Brown, Walker, Lane and Robertson families. Taking up a point that was raised by the coroner just before the break, the evidence is, at least from one witness, is that the Indigenous staff were three Indigenous staff. They were, of course, Jabberson, Williams, Mary Butcher and Nola Fisher, were not excluded, but just not included in the meetings of 9 November 2019. And you agreed with Her Honour to the suggestion that they, of course, should have been included in those meetings.
Yes.
And there are at least three reasons for that, aren't there? The first is that they are staff, and they should be treated like any other staff.
Yes.
The second reason is that they are members of the community who would have some important data that they could add to the meeting and important information they could add to the meeting.
Yes.
But the third is that they may be able to offer alternatives that might be available for staff to stay in the community.
Yes.
That's correct?
Yes.
Now, one of the important factors about removing the first responders from the community is that you remove the capacity of medical staff or for there to be some medical support in the case of acute emergency.
We're providing that acute service from Yullamoo, so staff were, if there was an acute situation that was an emergency, then they was still being provided, but the staff had to travel from Yullamoo to Intamoo, so it was still being provided.
Yeah. Are you a physician?
No.
No. Do you have any, I'm not either, but do you have any understanding of what time frame a defibrillator needs to be applied if it's going to be successful?
I've got some understanding as that we currently provide these kind of services, emergency services to multiple communities. I think I said, again, equivalent to the size of Yullamoo, since April 2021. So although I'm not in a position, I understand the probability and risks of what might happen and in the length of time that we need to travel these communities. And with my experience, know that this is a very rare event that we can't get to a place in time.
Well, my point is this, is that for a series of acute events, let's take a cardiac arrest.
Yes.
One needs ordinarily to have a first responder in 15 to 20 minutes, don't you?
You need someone as quickly as possible, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
A severe asthma attack for a child, you need somebody there as soon as possible.
Correct.
An anaphylactic reaction, you need someone there as soon as possible.
Correct.
And all the person might need is an EpiPen, but you need someone there as soon as possible.
Correct.
An hour for an anaphylactic reaction may lead to a death. That's right?
I'm not a clinician, but...
A serious laceration, you need somebody there quickly to stem some bleeding, correct?
Correct.
And a gunshot wound,
Correct.
you need somebody there quickly.
Correct.
And so it's important, the decision to remove the nursing staff is not just removing the nursing staff for assisting for ordinary or chronic ailments, it's removing the nursing staff as first responders who can respond quickly to an emergency.
Correct.
So that's a serious consideration.
It is.
Now, you also mentioned during the course of your evidence that, and you mentioned it again then, that you were going to manage this from Yullamoo.
Yes.
Did you understand, or did you have, and you said you had no information that staff from Yullamoo were not going to Yullamoo.
Correct.
Did you have any information that staff from Yullamoo were telling the people in town that they didn't think they could respond to emergencies in Yullamoo?
I had no, I didn't get that information.
Now, the protocol that was in place is document 9-9A DR6. We don't need to bring it up, but you understand the protocol that was in place at the time required, when considering whether to remove considering the temporary withdrawal of health service for staff safety, required consideration of at least 5 matters. Are PHC staff safe in the community? That's number one. Number two, are PHC staff staff at risk of harm? That's correct.
Correct, yes.
And 3, has a documented risk assessment been completed?
Correct.
Now, the documentation of the risk assessment is not just the historical record, is it?
Sorry, I don't quite understand what you mean.
You're a very experienced manager, and you have a lot of experience in the management of projects and whatnot. The documentation of a risk assessment is focused not only on there being a historical record, but also on process.
Yes.
And ensuring that people are focused on all the steps that need to be taken in order to make a decision. That's correct?
I guess in the risk assessments that we on our template, we have what we consider to be risks and considering the consequence likelihood and putting in mitigation strategies to reduce the risks.
Now, there's a template that I have, I'm just holding it up here, that is very large, and there's a lot of things that need to be considered there. I understand that was brought into play after November 2019.
I don't know when it was brought into play, no.
Is it the case that, I'll withdraw that and ask this question. After?
No, right.
Pre, okay. A more traditional form of risk assessment is your simple 5 issues that need to be addressed. Number 1, identification of the risk. Number 2, the assessment of the level of risk in the matrix of likelihood of risk and consequences. You're familiar with this?
Yes.
The third is the control measures that might be put in place to reduce the risk.
Yes.
The fourth is recording your finding.
Yes.
And the fifth is monitoring or reviewing controls.
Yes.
Now, when you're talking about, when you're responding to questions from Her Honour earlier in the day,
Yes.
about the risk wasn't changing in terms of the nurses being at risk of their houses being broken into with them inside, we might accept that is the case, that risk is not changing unless, of course, the police become involved. But one must also consider, in the balancing of that risk, the consequences to the community of withdrawing the first responders.
Exactly, and so the mitigation of that risk was providing emergency services from Uluru.
Yes, but that didn't ameliorate the risk that there were no first responders who could get there urgently.
It reduces the risk way down that there's still an emergency response. So I guess it's the time that one takes to go from Uluru to Yuendumu, and whatever the condition is, the response time. So although the response time is longer, we're still mitigating the risk by providing a response. So there wasn't like there was no response, there was a response that just took a little bit longer.
Isn't what happened in this case absolutely exemplifies how that risk wasn't significantly reduced? Because the first responders took almost 2 hours to attend, and Kumanjayi Walker had passed almost half an hour before they arrived.
That's correct, but I guess the incident is a very rare event. So if you consider frequency of events, this is like 1 in 10-year, 20-year events. So again, you have to take in the frequency of events into your probability analysis.
Had it been a serious cardiac arrest?
Again, you got to take into the probability of what these events are and the time to respond. So, to my knowledge, my knowledge probably about 1 in 500, 1 day in 500 such an events might happen in Yuendumu.
1 in 500.
1 in 500.
1 in 500.
This is based on evacuations of emergency people and how often that occurs from Yuendumu.
Have you got that data?
There is some data around that. Yes, I haven't got it on me though. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it would be useful if we could see the extent to which there are acute events that occur in Yuendumu that require an urgent response,
Yes, yeah.
including serious lacerations that might
Yes,
require
that's right.
some.
Yeah.
All right, now. The new risk assessment framework, your counsel suggests to me that this was in fact in place at the time. But you have no knowledge of that?
I'm not saying I don't have any knowledge. I do not remember when it was put in place.
Now, I've been instructed by one of my clients that in the mid-1990s, and I know this is before your time, but I just want to use this as an example. In the mid-1990s, there was an event where a patient came into the clinic with a pickaxe, and the staff were, not surprisingly, disturbed by that, and they wanted to evacuate. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
And there was a nurse by the name of Justice. I know you think I'm making this up, but that was, I'm told, was the nurse's name, Nurse Justice, and she wanted to stay. Everybody else wanted to leave. She wanted to stay, so she stayed, and the Indigenous staff supported her while the issue was sorted out. Did you ever contemplate that as being a possibility in this instance, given that Cassandra Holland wanted to stay?
I only knew Cassandra wanted to stay later in the afternoon. Again, it was to me was the risk of someone trying to enter into a property while people were there, and just again that risk of being violence occurring if someone did enter while staff were inside.
But without wanting to repeat what I've said before, that's got to be weighed against the consequences.
And again, I believe that we do weigh the consequences because we do, again, in December 2017 for 4 weeks and 8 weeks in 2018, we provide, due to shortage of staff, we provided exactly the same emergency response from Yuendamu to Yuelamu. So we're just going the other way. So it's the same time to respond to any emergency responses over there. And we've had to do this since, unfortunately, due to staff shortages since April 2021. So we're doing the same thing with a smaller population, so it's a quarter the size, but we're still doing that same thing. That's due to staff shortages, not, yeah.
But that's not a mirror situation.
It is, in what way? It's not a mirror situation.
If you have staff at Yuendamu, if you have a staff at Yuendamu who are looking after 1,000 people, and you have 200 people in Yuelamu,
Yes.
then it's not a mirror situation that you're having staff at Yuelamu and having patients at Yuendamu.
Well, the same people who are providing emergency responses currently in Yuendamu are also the same people on call are providing emergency services in Yuelamu. So they are looking after the 12, well, there's only 900, so looking after 1,100 people. So it's exactly the same, except the difference you're travelling is you're travelling one way by the other way. So it is the same. So to think if the risk, if we say everything being equal, the risk of something happening in Yuelamu must be about a quarter of the time. So for every 4 days is equivalent to 1 day in Yuendamu. So,
well, with the greatest respect, mathematically that can't possibly be right, because the workers in Yuendamu are providing services to 1,000 people, with 200 who need their support in Yuelamu. If the two workers are in Yuelamu, they have an hour to travel to 1,000 people. The risk must be higher in the latter rather than the former, as a matter of mathematical common sense.
yes, but after 4 days, if we consider the risk of whatever probability is happening per day, then after 4 days is equivalent to 1 day in Yuendamu, or 5 days if you want to go for 1,000. So if it's a fifth of the size, it must be a fifth. Yeah. Right. After 5 days, the time must be the same as for 1,000 people. For 1 day is the same for 5 days for 200 people.
We can agree to.
Again, we're providing, so at the moment we're providing the services from Yuendamu to Yuelamu. So there's two staff who are on call. If it's an emergency, they provide them to Yuendamu. If there's an emergency in Yuelamu, they have to travel across to Yuelamu. Now there's nobody else on call in Yuendamu, so they are providing that.
You're not doing an equivalence risk assessment saying, oh, well, we can take the risk this time because we took it that time. What you're saying is we haven't got the staff, we've got a number of staff and we can cover it, and because the community is much smaller in Yuelamu, the risks of these sorts of emergencies are also really smaller.
So the risk on the population, if it's a smaller population, the risk for the population is smaller because there's less people, and it's larger in Yuendamu because there's more people. But if you think on a time scale, then if an event is occurring, then if you consider populations, what might happen in one day in a large population might happen on, if you scale it up to the population on that scaled up factor. Because events happen over time, so you've got to scale everything up.
Is that how you do your risk assessments?
I think it's a factor it's about distance to travel, and it's about population sizes and considering what is the probability of an event occurring. So I guess so far, since again, unfortunately, we don't have shortage of staff, there's been no incident due to travel time to Uluru since April 2018. So we're talking about a year and a half. So if we're going back the other way, even though it's a larger population, you think the probability of something happening must be less for one day compared to 18 months, surely.
You said April 2018, you meant 2021.
Sorry, 2020, I'm getting confused, 2021, yeah.
I think we might agree to disagree on that, but thank you, Ron, I won't take up any more time.
Any other questions? Yes, Wild.
Dr. Reid, I'm Beth Wild and I'm a lawyer at NARJA. I have some questions for you and I'm going to try not to repeat the evidence that we already have. You have made two statements for this case, and the first one was made for police in November of 2019. The second statement we have is in affidavit form, and that was compiled, signed and provided on the 22nd of September of this year, so about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Is that right?
Yes.
You have said that in your decision-making process in November of 2019, you didn't make any notes during the days.
No, that's correct.
And the details of the decision-making process aren't in that initial statement that you made to the police. Is that correct?
Correct.
So the details that we have, and coming out mostly at paragraphs 108 and so on, at page 17 to 19 of your affidavit, and all those details, they've been made from your memory. Is that fair?
Sorry, I'm 108.
Paragraph 108, where you go into some detail about the consideration.
Oh, yes.
So that's based on your
Correct.
memory and
Yes.
the decision-making process you undertook
Yes.
on the day.
Yes.
Now, you can't discount, can you, that in this affidavit you haven't been informed by matters you've learned since that day when you're making that decision. Is that fair?
Yeah.
This matter's been, you've been in court throughout these proceedings and you've had access to other people's statements.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
But as best as you could recall, you have outlined the decision-making process that you undertook
Yes.
on that morning.
Yes.
You have told us today that you were made aware that extra police were going into community, and that was about 3:30 p.m.
I believe it was about 3:30, yeah.
And you think from a conversation with Helen?
I'm either confused, it's either Helen or Fiona, yeah.
And were you advised as to, did you get any more information about what police were going to be?
No, just extra police.
And in your view, the police would have had a protective factor?
Police would have a protective factor, yeah.
That would have, if you had been aware earlier in the day when you were making that decision?
It would have, yeah, I could put into thought about did that mitigate the risk enough, yes.
And in fact, you've agreed with Her Honour that may have led to a different outcome.
Yes.
In fact, had you been aware of
Yes.
the fact that extra police were going
Yes.
Now, would it surprise you to learn that in fact Nurse Vanessa Watts was told by Julie Frost at 2 a.m. that morning that extra police were going to be going in later that day?
Yes, I didn't aware that the extra police would have known that earlier time, no.
Right. So that was never conveyed to you from the nurses
No,
via Fiona or Helen?
no,
And again, had you been given that information earlier, it may have factored into
may
it.
have factored in, yes.
I don't think that this highlights the problem in receiving your information second or third hand,
Yes,
because you're relying on the information that you're getting either from Fiona or Helen,
yes,
and potentially missing out on some pretty vital information in the process.
yes.
Now I will turn to your affidavit, so it's page 17, paragraph 108, and this is exhibit 909A, I think we're at now. You, in the first paragraph, you say under subparagraph A, our staff did not consider themselves to be safe in Windermere that weekend. You would agree that by and large, that your decision to authorise the withdrawal of the nurses was based upon the perception of fear.
Yes.
And that perception was not your perception, but their perception.
Well, yes, they had the fair perception, yeah. Yeah.
And in fact, you go on to say why it is so important, and that's because they're the ones in the community observing community attitudes firsthand.
Yes.
And they don't feel safe, that's a warning that must be carefully considered by management.
Yes.
Yes, and you're the manager, you've got to
Yes.
check them.
Yes.
You also say in your experience that our staff tend to underestimate threats to their own safety rather
Yes.
than the opposite.
Yes.
What's that based on?
That's based on, I've had some long-term staff who lived in the community a long time, and where they've had, I know they've had break-ins of people entering the home, and they've considered it not to be an issue, which I consider an underestimation of risk of someone. Yeah.
I'm going to take you to some evidence we had yesterday from Nurse Cassandra Holland, and this is a transcript 1373 to 1374. She said the following in her evidence. She said, she was asked, did you at any time outside clinical hours socialise with the Aboriginal staff? She said, no, I did not. Did you socialise with any of the other stakeholders in the community? Only the nurses? She went on, there was no opportunity to go out and meet the community. We weren't able to go for a walk and meet people. We weren't encouraged to walk outside the clinic. We weren't encouraged to we were encouraged to stay within the confines of our yard, or to not even walk to the health service. Were you aware that she gave that evidence yesterday?
I did watch her evidence. I don't quite necessarily remember it, but yes, I accept. Yep.
Were you surprised when she said that?
Yes.
And she was asked, what do you mean, both by counsel and assisting Dr. Dwyer, what do you mean you weren't able to walk in the community? And she said it was dangerous. You heard that yesterday?
I don't think I heard that one. No, there was a break where I didn't see his evidence. Yeah.
And she was asked, who told you that? And Nurse Holland said, Luana told me that, but also personal experience. You could get taken down. You would get taken down by the dogs. My neighbour wouldn't leave his house unless he had a massive big stick with him. He was terrified, he was scared. He put the fear onto me, saying, you won't walk to the clinic in the morning, I'll pick you up, we'll all go together. She went on to say, I had a fear for my own safety in Windermere. It's very hard to describe, and it's a fear I've not had in other Indigenous communities. But I certainly did not choose to walk around. The only exercise we got, we would drive our cars out to the airstrip and walk within the airstrip confines. That was our only exercise. We didn't walk through town. None of us did. Did you hear that evidence yesterday?
No.
Were you aware that at this clinic that nurses like Cassandra Holland were advised on arrival that it wasn't safe to walk from the house to the clinic?
No.
Were you aware that in practice they never left the clinic grounds or their outside their home?
No.
You aware that the only exercise they got was when they drove out to the airstrip?
I do understand about the dogs issue. I've stayed out there, and there are dogs that, when you walk, want to bite you. In fact, there's quite I wouldn't say, there are dog bites that happen with community members that happen, and certainly when I go for some exercise, I walk very carefully from where I'm staying to the airstrip, because I've had a big dog come at me before. So yes, dogs are a problem. People carry sticks to hit the dogs, so yes, dogs are a problem.
And particularly with exercise, when you look like...
I certainly wouldn't want to run around the streets. I'd run around the airstrip, yes.
The dogs want to give chase, is that right?
Sorry?
The dogs give chase.
Give chase, yes.
Were you aware that the nurses at UMU didn't associate with any of the other stakeholders?
No.
Could be perhaps, in fact, describe themselves as insular?
No.
Now, would you agree then that in some situations a group of people, particularly an insular one, may in fact come to have a heightened sense of fear?
Yeah, I wouldn't know, sorry. It's possible, but I haven't read that before, so.
In these circumstances, where someone is warned upon arrival that it's dangerous in the community, it may be that the nurses have a heightened sense of fear.
I think Cassandra said that, but I haven't heard anyone else say that, so it's one person as opposed to the group.
You were told that houses were being broken into whilst persons were at home.
Yes.
Is that right? And you were told that tools were used to break in whilst persons were awake and offenders knew they were awake.
I believe, yes.
So that's the information that you've been relying
Yes, yes.
And it was on that basis that you felt that there was a heightened risk of personal harm?
Yes.
Because people were at home?
Yes.
Offenders knew they were at home?
Yes.
And persisted with
Yes.
break-in? Is that what you understood to have happened?
Yes.
Okay. And that's factored into your risk assessment?
Yes.
Right. Now, I just want to take you through some of the events that did happen that we have objective evidence about. On the 6th of November, Luana's house was broken into, and that was during the day when no one was at home. You were aware of
Yes,
that?
yes.
On the 7th of November, a car was damaged, a clinic car.
Yes.
On the 8th of November, now this is the night that everyone gets woken up, Vanessa Watts wakes to hear someone banging, trying to get into her house. She turned on the lights and they ran away.
Right, I didn't understand that. I understood that people were trying to still enter a house while she was awake for some time.
Right. So that wasn't information that you had when you were making an assessment?
No.
Right, that she turned on the lights and ran away. Now the tools that are heard potentially later, tools were found later in Luana's house, I understand, and Luana wasn't at home.
No.
So, in fact, the tools that were said to have been used are more likely to have occurred at Luana's house, who wasn't at home.
I understood the tools were used on her house.
On Vanessa's house.
Yes, yes.
Now, again, doesn't this highlight the problem that you're receiving the information in the second or third hand reported from the nurses by Helen or Fiona?
Yes.
You don't have all the information.
Yes.
It also illustrates the importance for getting collateral information, perhaps from the police, to make a proper objective assessment as to the actual risk.
Yes.
Instead, you're relying on what the nurses are reporting
Yes.
via a second or third party.
Yes.
Now, you would agree that it's important to have that extra information
Yes.
by calling the police to get that risk assessment. Yes?
Yes.
And you also agree that in order to properly have that risk assessment, you should be following all of the other collaborative
Yes.
aspects of the
Yes.
risk assessment that are in fact mandated by your own guidelines. Yes?
Yes.
I now wish to turn to your paragraph 147 of your statement, where you go into what happens when you go to the This is your affidavit, sorry. What happened on the Monday morning? On the Monday morning at about 9:45, you received a call from Noel Fisher.
Yes.
Did you receive that call on your mobile phone?
Yes, I think I did.
And you've got Noel Fisher's personal details, is that right?
No, I believe I had said I wanted to can we talk with some staff, and one of my staff members went to find some phone numbers and try and find her number, so I didn't have a number yet.
When did you do that?
That was the morning.
On the morning.
Yeah,
Okay, so on the morning you asked for contact with the staff members.
Yes, I wanted to talk with, see if we could talk to some traditional owners or,
Yes.
yeah.
And in fact, the first phone call was able to be facilitated by 9:45 in the morning.
Yes,
So it didn't take long, did it?
at 9:45.
You later speak to Javison Williams, is that right? You were able to contact him? That's in paragraph 151, did you say that?
Yep, something is just
So you're able
talking.
to speak to him?
Yep,
So I'm now going back up, but at paragraph 148, you've attended a regional coordinators meeting.
yes.
You've organised that on a Monday morning.
I didn't organise that, I just attended.
At 1:30 p.m, you arrived in Uwindamoon
Yes,
and you had a meeting with the following elders, who are all members of the local health advisory group: Eddie Robertson, Kumanjayi Nelson, Robbie Robertson, Warren Williams, Francis Kelly, Mary Butcher, Noel Fisher, Maisie Wayne, Nellie Wayne, Rose Ross. Javison also attended. Is that right?
yes.
Well, that's something you could have done on Saturday. Would you agree with that?
I guess again it was trying to contact somebody to do that.
I just said to council assisting, you had hours to play with. You weren't worried about the imminent threat during the day.
Correct.
So all of this would have been done prior to the decision to withdraw.
There was a possibility because there was a funeral on, so it may have been difficult to contact people on the funeral and arrange something while the funeral was going.
You didn't even try, did you?
I did not know.
And should have. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. No further questions. So I'm just getting a note. Nothing further.
Yes, Mr. Ryan.
Mr. Reeves, my name is Martin for the Paramburu Committee. Probably worked that out since you've been in court a lot for this hearing. And so you would know from our other questions that we're interested in prevention in the future. Now, can I suggest to you that what's been revealed today in the questions that other barristers have asked you is that there has been at various points a breakdown in communications within NT Health on the relevant day, 9 November. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
And there's been, what's been revealed today, there's been a breakdown at times in process, in good process. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
And in good documentation. Now, that's a necessary part of this inquest, but between the 9th of November and the months that followed right up until today, one would imagine that NT Health has already engaged in an in-depth analysis of its own failures of what happened on the 9th of November. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as far as I know, there's no such document on the brief, which is an in-depth analysis by NT Health of its own failings of what happened at that time.
There was a root cause analysis done.
There's a root cause analysis.
Yes.
So is that the name of the document?
Yes.
And its precise name is a root cause analysis, and have you seen that document?
Yes.
And does it review the events of 9 November?
It reviews the around the the health. Yes.
It's on the brief.
9-5C.
So I've missed it. So I'll move to the next point in that case. Your decision to withdraw, which was made on the 9th of November, at various times today, based on different series of different amounts of information that were given to you today, you said that you had no alternative to make that decision. And later today you said that you would have made a different decision. And as I understand this, is what I just want to clarify, based on all of the material that's come to you today through the questioning, are you now saying that if you had known all the things that have been put to you today, you would have made a different decision?
I may have changed the risk factor, so I'm not saying I would have made a different decision. It would have certainly examined it against those different things I've now known. Yes, or could have done.
So I'm still not clear. You could have made a different decision. Is that what you're saying?
Possibly. I still, against what saying is the risk, I guess, the risk that I understood at the time as someone entering a house, while Vanessa was there, if the information was in fact people would run away, then that I believe would decrease the risk of the event that actually happened. So the perceived risk of staff might not be against the objective risk.
You're aware of Congress, of course,
Yes.
Aboriginal Community Control Health Organisations. Have you studied, firstly, the statement that they have put on the brief and two of the doctors from Congress?
I haven't studied it, no.
Have you, in the past, been made aware and considered the number of withdrawals that have occurred from Congress-controlled medical clinics around the Northern Territory?
No.
Are you aware of how few times they've withdrawn their staff?
No.
I just want to be clear about the security guard point. It seems obvious in this court in retrospect that on the 9th of November, one of the tangible, practical and effective solutions which was available was to send security guards to Yuendamu on the 9th to manage the situation of the break-ins in the quarters of some of the nurses.
Yes.
And you've said that in December 2020, that was something that you dealt with on Christmas Day. That
Yes.
it took 5 days to implement, and it's something that's been happening more frequently. Well, it has been happening frequently since that time.
Yes.
So, just to be clear, are you saying that across the Northern Territory, that the Northern Territory Health, or in its previous names, was not using security guards sent out to communities to protect either facilities or domestic quarters prior to that time?
I'm not aware, and I guess I work in Central Australia in the Barclay, aware of security guards being used, no.
I'm not going to answer the question of probability theory with you has emerged. But one of the things that matters in this case and going forward is transparency. And the question has been raised of how many of the need for you to consider as a decision maker the number of people who are vulnerable if you were to withdraw services from communities such as Yuendamu.
Yes.
And what I haven't been able to discern from your answers or from your statement is how that is given weight. For instance, how many people in Yuendamu were at a much greater risk of a bad health outcome on the 9th of November once you withdrew the services? How many people were vulnerable at that time whose vulnerability increased significantly because services were withdrawn?
So like I said, there was a vulnerable person list. I know Helen did look and asked about the vulnerable people and how many of those vulnerable people might have had any issues. And I believe might have been one person.
In the whole community?
Yes.
what sort of numbers would lead to a different decision?
Again, it's about whether an event might happen. So, clinically speaking, I'm not quite sure what you're meaning. So, a person might have health issues, but what are we actually talking about that might happen during an evening? I'm not quite sure what you.
You've identified Unimu as having one vulnerable person.
I guess I've got health issues that might need attention over the weekend. I think that's what we're talking about. Do they need, some medical assistance over the weekend?
I'm not interested in the identity of that person.
No, I can't. No.
Can you identify the illness that was in question?
No.
Can you identify the level of risk? Was the person likely to die?
I believe Helen inquired with the staff what was going on with that person and deemed that there was no level of risk that someone was going to die. No.
Is there a number, if you were to face the same kind of problem today and had to make a similar kind of decision about whether to withdraw or not withdraw for a community the size of Unimu, is there a number of people at risk which would lead you to say that is a number that we're not prepared to accept?
Again, it's a risk of what's happening to the staff versus what are the issues that might happen over that weekend. So I'm not entirely sure what clinical conditions we're talking about to make any really informed answer to your question. Yeah.
Well, it's easy to say we consider the vulnerability of the community. What I'm trying to extract from you is how do you do that in fact? There's one person who's that your staff have identified as particularly vulnerable if you withdraw services. Assuming that that's a more significant number, or 3, 5, 7 people who are particularly vulnerable, next time there's a decision to be made about withdrawing services. What are the criteria that you're imposing other than a generalisation that it's something we give weight to?
Again, that's clinically what may happen to that person over. I guess, are we talking over a night? Are we talking over a weekend? Again, if we provide primary health care services rather than emergency services during the day. So it's about we're providing an emergency situation that occurs because someone's vulnerable deteriorates further. I guess it's about those considerations. So I'm afraid I can't answer your question. I'm not a clinician around those areas.
Would you evacuate a vulnerable person who you thought was at high risk with
Yes.
staff, for example?
That's correct. You could evacuate the person before. Yeah.
Something that you might
Yes.
consider?
That's correct. Yes.
This is the point I'm not going to labour because you've been asked a lot of questions around it, but during the day, Saturday night, at various times your staff became aware that there were further police coming to Unimu and you became aware prior to 4 p.m.
Yes.
It's a rather obvious question, but given that the primary issue going to the question of withdrawal was the question of staff safety and burglaries, and given that extra police were coming precisely to address community safety and to make the arrest, why didn't you just tell your staff to do a U-turn and go back?
I don't think there's no phone coverage between here and Unimu and Alice Springs, so you couldn't phone anybody if they're travelling.
Is that the reason? As simple as that. Because there was no phone coverage, you didn't tell them to do a U-turn.
Again, I knew there was extra staff going. I believe there was staff going to Unimu. I believe the risk would have been mitigated by someone being arrested, and then my intention was send the staff that had gone to Unimu back to Unimu.
So I just didn't understand the last sentence you said.
So staff. So I expected that staff were going to Unimu. So once.
I understand.
Yeah. Okay.
On this question of staff going to Unimu, you were under the impression that 2 extra staff from Unimu were going to Unimu.
Yes.
And it's clear that that never happened, and you only found out about the failure for that to happen much later.
Yes.
has there been an analysis done of the causes of the breakdown in communication which led to that failure where it's two staff were not immune to it, even though you thought they were?
I thought that might be covered within the RCA, but it didn't seem to be addressed. So, yes, no, I haven't got an answer to that one.
Because it does seem to be systemic failure, doesn't it?
That did seem to be, yes, something that should have happened did not happen.
You say in one of your statements, in your first statement, that there was you got a text from Helen Gill at about 9:30 or 9:45 saying there was a large mob outside the police station. And in your other statement, you say that there was a large group outside the police station. You got a text saying that. And I can't tell from Helen Gill's material that she actually refers to that text at all. Do you recall now the text that we're talking about, and can you recall the content of it?
No, I can't recall.
In your first statement, you say, paragraph 44, you discuss the question of the ambulance being used as a decoy.
Yes.
And it's not an issue, I don't think it's an issue addressed in your second statement, in your longer statement.
No.
It doesn't appear to be mentioned in that statement. This question of the ambulance being used as a decoy, who told you that the ambulance was being used as a decoy?
I believe Helen told me that.
And what steps since then have you taken about that? Have you spoken, for instance, to your superiors or to the police saying that this was something that should never have happened?
No, we haven't really. I guess I talked with my manager at the time, Sue Corner, about.
So you remember at the time?
Was Sue Corner, but I haven't talked to police about it. No.
You understand that the idea of using the ambulance to go to the airport as a decoy was a step in deceiving the local community.
Yes.
Do you understand that? Do you accept that it's something that should never have happened?
Yes.
But as I understood the previous answer, there's no further review about that. Has NT Health done anything about it to make sure it never happens again?
No.
Do you accept that it's a dreadful breach of trust on the local community unit to use an ambulance in that way in
Yes.
those circumstances?
Yes.
Yes, that makes sense.
Questions? Mr. Hutton.
Dr. Reeve, you gave evidence earlier to Mr. Coleridge of the importance of primary health care in remote communities in Central Australia.
Yeah.
Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you confirmed it, in your view it's obviously very important.
Yes.
You would not reduce access to primary health care in Central Australia without believing you had a very strong basis for doing so, is that correct?
Yes.
It would require drastic circumstances for you to take a measure to reduce services.
Yes.
You've set out the circumstances you were confronted with in Uendamu on the 9th of November in some detail in your affidavit.
Yes.
Let me summarise them like this. On the 6th of November, the clinic manager's house was broken into. On the 7th of November, the clinic manager's car was broken into. On the 8th of November, there were attempted break-ins at the clinic manager's house, at nurse Vanessa Watts' house, at nurse John Alting's house, and at graduate nurse Lisa Meredith's house.
Yes.
So at 4 separate staff houses in one evening, and 3 of those houses, staff were present.
Yes.
Tools, including a pickaxe, had been found at Luana's house. And in addition to those incidents, 2 cars had been broken into that night. Janina Rewalker's car, had been broken into, and the clinic car had been broken into. That's correct?
Yes.
Those are very concerning circumstances for you as the general manager, I suspect.
Yes.
Putting aside the issue of whether or not that people trying to break into Vanessa's house had run away when the light came on or not, the circumstances, as I've just run through, presented a very real risk to staff safety.
Yes.
You were concerned, as I understand it from your affidavit, about what might happen the following evening. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were concerned that this was an upward trajectory of events.
Yes.
You don't need the police to tell you that we've had 1 incident on the first night, 1 incident on the second night, and then many incidents on the Friday night.
Yes.
And your concern was what would happen the following night if staff were to remain in those houses and there was further attempts to break in while they were there.
Yes.
The consequences of home invasions, people getting into staff houses, can be very serious. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Staff could be assaulted.
Yes.
The consequences can be worse still, and you've referred in your affidavit to Nurse Gail Woodford.
Yes.
She was killed as a result of a home invasion.
Yes.
And you state in your affidavit that was something that was on your mind on the day of 9 November.
Yes.
Were you aware also, Dr. Reeve, of an incident that had occurred in Uendamu in 2015 involving a WIDAC staff member who had suffered a home invasion and had also been killed?
Yes.
You were asked by Mr. Coleridge about improvements to infrastructure in Uendamu prior to November 2019. Do you recall whether some steps were in fact taken to strengthen or harden properties in Uendamu that were occupied by health staff?
Prior to November 2019?
Yes.
I think they were. Things are a bit vague, yes, but I believe they were, yes.
Perhaps I can try and jog your memory.
Yes.
Do you remember if some unpopular fences, colour bonds?
Ah, yes. So, yes, the fences. Yes, this was the fence issue. That's correct, yes.
And do you recall crim-safe screens were put in at a number of houses?
Yes, yes.
Infrastructure upgrades alone cannot prevent break-ins, can they?
No, a determined person will still be able to get in. We had some, when we got with the new windows after the event, they were supposed to be not being able to get into. People still managed to generally open those crim-safe windows and get in.
As indeed we saw at Luana's house on the 6th
Yes,
of November.
yes.
In your role as General Manager, you've been involved in many discussions with police and elders about property crime in remote communities.
Yes.
Is it your experience that if police are notified of break-ins, they are immediately able to stop them from occurring?
No.
Have you before, in attempting to deal with a security issue in a remote community where you've known or where it's been suspected who the person was, contacted elders who you know in the community to see whether or not they can help remediate the problem?
So in that situation in December 2020, I think there were several teenagers, or I think they're around teenagers, who were identified, who were causing a lot of issues, and so the elders did become aware of those children and did manage to stop them, yes, from continuing.
Yes, and you yourself have contacted elders and asked...
Yes, I've rung them up just for assistance, yes.
one of the difficulties of the situation in Uendamu, as I understand your evidence, is it was not known who the people in
No.
records were.
No.
You've been involved in many community meetings in your role with elders and police.
Can I just ask, and I know there's some technological issues, but obviously a lot of identification of offenders is through CCTV these days. And I did go back to that statement, Ms Fleming's statement that you referred me to yesterday. But what's the attitude towards CCTV around nursing houses?
So we have been discussing, about security cameras. We generally think it's a good idea because we identify people, I guess, where things have got stuck in previous conversations about the privacy issues and who will be monitoring any footage. So obviously if it's on your private property that you're living in or government housing, you don't want your employer to be able to access it. So I think at the moment it's got stuck around the privacy rather than anything, to my understanding.
Dr. Reeve, you've been involved in a number of community meetings with police and elders in different communities in Central Australia, including Uendamu.
Yes.
Is it generally the sort of thing that can be pulled together in a couple of hours?
No, generally these things can't be pulled, and generally speaking, meetings, when we say a community meeting, we're only talking about maybe 10 people, 15 people might turn up, so we're not talking about the whole community.
Yes. But those aren't, my question is, in the 2 or so hours you may have had to play with on this day, was it realistic to try and...
No. Yes.
Thank you. In fact, you've been involved in discussions to try and organise a community meeting in Uendamu for some months.
Yes.
Recently, and it's yet to come to fruition.
Yeah, so we've been trying since around April to have a meeting out in Uendamu. As I said before, we've got someone with Chief Minister and Cabinet out there to assist, to arrange. So, and I've also got 2 positions that help organise these meetings. We arrange these meetings, but due to various regions and cultural businesses and other issues, none of these meetings have yet to occur due to other issues taking priority.
We heard some evidence from Luana Simons that employment of local Aboriginal staff, one of the barriers that can be faced is documentation that's required to be provided to NT Health. Am I correct to say that staff are being hired to address that issue in particular and to assist greater local...
Yes. Yeah, so we used to have only one position, which we call Aboriginal Employment Career Development Officer, so we expanded that team to, when we have the Barclay, to 4 positions, one for each of our districts, and their job is to go out and talk with community about what positions we've got in the House Centre, try and recruit people, assist people with getting their documentation and paperwork, providing mentorship to the position, helping them doing mandatory training, and we've been also helping provide certificate 2s and primary health care to people as well, so they assist with that.
Yes, thank you. And finally, you're asked by Mr McMahon about the number of acutely unwell people in Uendamu on the night of 9 November, and you suggested that Ms Gill had been involved in discussions about that, and you suggested that the number of people may have been 1. If I was to tell you that, in fact, the number of people that were considered to be acutely unwell in Uendamu that evening was 0.
Yeah, so when I said there was one vulnerable person, I didn't say they were acutely unwell, I just said there was one vulnerable. I didn't say that they were actually unwell, they were a vulnerable person.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Renee.
Are there any other questions? Dr. Reeve, you've been asked some fairly difficult questions, and you've been asked to consider some fairly difficult issues. We are just hoping and that the process allows for everyone to identify where things might be able to be done better. It's not to say, that there's any, serious or significant criticism in relation to what has happened. I can understand that there were genuine concerns about the safety of the nurses, but hopefully through the process, however difficult it is, it does help people reflect on what happened and whether or not improvements can be made for the future. We'll adjourn till tomorrow.